Amidst Miami's recent struggles against playoff caliber teams and the revival of the Bullygate discourse over the course of the past weekend, the Dolphins' toughness element has been put back under the microscope. We're exploring where this team can find some more dogs for the roster here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special shout out and welcome to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. We don't just say it. We live it here on the Locked On Network. Today on the show, we're talking about dogs. Where can the Dolphins find some dogs for the roster? Between Tyreek Hill and then Devon Achane and Deshaun Elliott and the Dolphins' record against the best teams that they play the last couple of seasons, amidst the backdrop of Bullygate coming back into the spotlight because Jonathan Martin says, well, actually, I really never felt like I was bullied that whole time, but my mom told the media that I was, so I'm going to run with it. And seemingly the Dolphins' adjustment to that very dark and ugly chapter of their organization about 12 years ago, every fan has had some kind of knee-jerk reaction to Bully being back in the spotlight. And this team is a team that is not going to beat allegations of being soft until they prove otherwise, and that it was words used by Deshaun Elliott, Tyreek Hill in the midst of, after he says what he says after the Jets game. And then he hops on an online stream with one of his streaming opportunities this offseason and is defiant, says, I have every right to feel the way that I feel. I'm a competitor. We need more dogs on this roster. And Devon Achane goes on with Johnny Manziel last week on Johnny Manziel's podcast and says, I think we got enough dogs. We just need more guys to bring it out. Regardless of however, you cut it, this team needs more of an edge. And you can talk about whether or not that's really going to change with Mike McDaniel and his personality as a head coach of the football team. And I think that's a legitimate question to ask, because more often than not, teams do take on the personality of their head coaches. And Mike is not really, at least from the outside looking in, a particularly intense individual. So I understand why there's some skepticism and that this team is getting absolutely zero benefit of the doubt from anybody in the fan base right now. But the objective of what this offseason has to be about is finding more of an edge, finding more players with an edge. And, that gets into what is the definition of a dog as a talent, right? And I know this is big on Omar Kelly's list right now of this team needs more dogs. When you think about Randy Starks and Jarvis Landry and Rashad Jones, and those guys were dogs. And make no mistake, Jonathan Martin's admission of I was never really bullied, or nor did I feel like I was bullied, none of that excuses some of the conduct and the language that Richie Incognito used that came out in the Wells report for the investigation into this football team. It doesn't excuse any of that, but it does change the history that's been written that the Dolphins seem to, I don't want to say overcorrect against, but this has kind of been a central theme of many iterations of the football team, since not all of the iterations of the football team. I'm not saying you have to go out and get guys that fly that close to the sun in wildly inappropriate ways in some of the ways Richie Incognito did either. But this toughness perception around this organization has only been perpetuated the last few years by you felt like they had talent on the offensive line, and then Isaiah Wynn, Robert Hunt, and Connor Williams all collectively go down in stretches of the 2023 season And eventually they all overlap together and you're playing with 3 backups and your trench play is not proportionate to what the talent that you've collected is. And then Connor Williams gets hurt and leaves. And Rob Hunt leaves for a $100 million contract in free agency. I'd say Robert Hunt was a dog. Christian Wilkins was certainly a dog. And, he did some things flying pretty close to the sun as far as like the edge of appropriateness as well on the football field. But those guys leave. And while the Dolphins got some really good returns on players back, and I think you could probably put Jordan Brooks. I reflect on the way that he played last season and the toughness in which he played with and the intensity which he played with and the fact that, he assumed a leadership role. I think he would qualify as a dog, but you lost it in the trenches. And then that only compounded your issues this year and whittled down the menu of ways in which you could try to solve problems throughout the course of the season. And then Austin Jackson goes down. And I wouldn't even classify Austin Jackson as a dog. I think he's got good point of attack ability in the run game, creates the most movement out of anybody on the line. But the toughness perception has been fueled historically, long-term and short-term, going all the way back to this saga that's been put back in the spotlight because Jonathan Martin feels after 12 years, it's time to step forward and say, actually, I was just kidding about that whole bullying thing. I really wasn't bullied, but my mom said so, and I ran with it. Okay. More than anything else, I think that underscores the importance of getting the football character element of your evaluations correct. Especially in a city like Miami, where there are robust and profound things to do away from football. And I think that's part of the definition of what a dog is the kinds of people that are undeterred by some of those distractions that can exist. We're going to get a little bit into that next, and then we're going to talk about where the Dolphins can find some of these guys next here on Locked On Dolphins, so stick with us. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on all of the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip, or if you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action all game long. If you're looking for bigger payouts, you can even combine your bets into a same-game parlay. FanDuel's live betting feature makes it possible for you to stay in every single moment throughout the game. So even if it's a blowout, it could still be an exciting game. You could be betting on a late game rally or picking an individual player to hit on a clutch 3. You never miss your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet wins, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So what is a dog? Like how would you quantify a dog? I think part of it is the play demeanor in which they carry themselves with on the field. As far as there's a certain level of dynamic athleticism and power and explosiveness that is, I think if you could boil it down to like a single individual measure, it's your ability to impose your will on an opponent. And that's not, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. We're going to turn the ball off and hand it off to Ricky 420 times in a season. Although Ricky Williams unequivocally is a dog when you look at historical dogs in the Dolphins franchise. But it's more so how you are able to, whether it's a down block or whether it's a block on the perimeter, or whether it's deconstructing a block as an interior defensive lineman, or whether it is winning at the catch point as a receiver, or running somebody over in the open field as a ball carrier. You think about the Dolphins, and even like if you wanted to put Tyreek Hill in the dog bucket for like his historical production and being such an elite player, he doesn't really have that element of run through you against press coverage and against Kansas City in the playoffs, run over you in the open field, right? And then there's the other element that I think really constitutes who I would consider to be a quote unquote dog. And it's the guys who live, breathe, eat, sleep football with a level of um, intensity, personality intensity that you can tell this is we're all business. This is what we're here to do, which is to dominate and win and impose your will, right? So I think it's that marriage and that intersection for me, and that's where I feel like I'm really blessed with a lot of what I have the chance to do with the NFL draft evaluations that I do, and being able to cover the league to the depths of which I do with Locked On NFL Scouting, right? It's very easy to look at an individual roster and identify things that aren't working within a roster. But to have an understanding of what the dynamics are for each of the 32 rosters across the league, including players that are scheduled to hit free agency, for example, or might be requesting a trade because they're unhappy with their personal situation right now with the team that they're in. Or alternatively, I do about 300 to 350 player evaluations every given year. I go to the Combine. I go to the Senior Bowl. It's the Shrine Bowl this year. A chance to meet, engage, interact. And I don't have the depths of exposures to these guys as what the NFL teams do. And I certainly go into those encounters and those experiences with an understanding that they're on their job interview, right? You're going to get the best version of them. But there's certain guys that you talk to on the practice field in Mobile, away from the podium when they're done their big media session. You get on and do a Zoom call with and do an interview. And when you're done, they're willing to hang around for 20 minutes and watch a little bit of college tape and talk you through what they're seeing on tape, right? You get all of these experiences and all these exposures to all these different players. And there's certain guys that you leave those interactions and you're like, yep, I got it. I get it. And this guy, maybe from a pure talent perspective, isn't the most talented player at his position in the draft, but it's not going to surprise me if this guy gets drafted higher than I think he does, or this guy signs in free agency for more than I think he's going, than people think he's going to, and ends up being a really successful player. Because of this, the intensity level between the ears of the understanding, and a guy who had that that impression for me at this year's Senior Bowl was Darius Alexander, the defensive tackle from Toledo, because he was talking with my coworker at the 33rd team, who also happens to be a Dolphins fan. He's a great guy, Dante Colinelli. You should follow him if you don't on social media. But he was talking about, my first day in the pass rush 101s wasn't the best, but then I went in and, I watched the tape on all these guys and came up with rush plans for all the individual guys that I was going to be practicing against based off their college tape and the tape from day one of the Senior Bowl practices. And lo and behold, he got more dominant every single day. So you're at the Senior Bowl. You're here having an opportunity to sit down and meet with all the teams and do the practice installs and do the practice and do the media obligations and do X, Y, and Z. And then you get done at the end of the day, and it's supposed to be this exhaustive experience that tests you in a lot of different ways, not only just physically, but also mentally. And you sit down and you craft rush plans for all the guys coming out of Toledo, and you dominate guys that went to bigger schools than you and look like the best, at times the best player on the field. That's a guy that gets it here. And that's, to me, that's a big part of being, quote unquote, a dog. Jarvis Landry is a great example. And right, like, I don't put Jarvis Landry in the lexicon of Miami Dolphins players that some people do as far as like this upper stratosphere, because I knew what Jarvis was like physically. Well, he ran what, like a 4.7 in the 40? But he was tough as nails. He was super smart. He was intense with his play. There was nothing that was beneath him as far as assignments and responsibilities. And he got it up top, and he played with his heart. And if you can't feel that when you watch some guys, it's probably a flag that they're not or won't develop into, quote unquote, a dog. So where can the Dolphins find some dogs for the roster this year? So this team has more of an edge, which I think it desperately needs. And I think everybody would agree with that. It's not just finding big-bellied guys that wear their jerseys up over top of their bellies so that they show off the offensive line build and bump bellies and move you off the line of scrimmage. Right? That's a big piece of the puzzle. But it's not everything, and it's not everything that this team needs encapsulated in an individual situation. Think about the tackling issues this Dolphins defense had last year. Some of the guys that were out there in the stages in the careers that they were in, and the tackling that you saw, it needs to be better. And that's here, and that's here, and that's the physical element of it. It's between the ears, it's in the heart, and it's the physical element of it. And you need to find more players that eat, sleep, and breathe it. I got some ideas on where we can find some of these guys. Stick with us. So I did this for Touchdown Miami yesterday. There's an article that ran on the 17th, and it was the free agency / NFL draft all dog team. And I'll give some impressions. I'm not going to go over the whole roster because if you want to check it out, you go to touchdownmiami.substack.com and read the article. And I don't want to just sit here and use this podcast time that we have together on this platform to just read names off a list, right? Like, that's no fun. But I'll say this. I picked one player at every position for free agency and the draft to come up with like a roster of, like, if I had to pick the guys that I think had the best chance of being dogs or are proven to be dogs with their previous stops, this is what it looks like. And I think there's some challenges that exist as it pertains to guys that are your best candidates to be dogs in free agency. Some of those guys like Tyron Smith and Zach Ertz are unequivocally dogs, but they're late stage career dogs. It doesn't really mesh with them being the best versions of themselves moving forward, and that being in marriage with what this football team needs. You don't need a bunch of mid-30s holdover guys, right? So that creates some challenges as far as accessibility to free agency dogs. Then there's other guys like, I would say, Javon Hargrave and Dre Greenlaw from the front seven in San Francisco. Those guys are unequivocally dogs. But neither one of them played a significant amount of snaps last year. They're also mid-career type players coming off of injuries that are probably going to get competitive market deals. Now, I don't think they're going to get market reset contracts. Like Javon Hargrave's last deal in San Francisco was $21 million per season. I don't think he's going to get in that stratosphere again. But is the dollar amount mixed with the age, mixed with the injury element of what he's coming off of, is that what you could craft and justify the best plan to move forward with in free agency? Same with Dre Greenlaw. If you told me the price was right for Dre Greenlaw, I'd be stoked about an addition like that opposite Jordan Brooks. But there's inherent risk with a guy that's coming back off of an Achilles tear from the Super Bowl and missed almost the entirety of the year last year. And you're talking about a competitive market contract for him. So there's not a lot of guys in free agency that I think there's going to be an intersection of price point, age, longevity, and immediate health snapshot with injuries that is going to give you a robust pool, because the vast majority of the top tier talents that you would constitute potential dogs, there's a lot of money to spend in free agency this year, and a lot of teams that have a lot of money to spend, and the list of top shelf free agents is going to be pretty short. So you're going to get into a you-know-what contest with a lot of teams that have 3, 4, 5 times as much cap space as you do. And for the record, I also think that's bad business to be so hyper-competitive in that first wave in free agency that you're throwing dollars just to throw dollars to win a bidding war. Because while I sorely miss Rob Hunt on the roster, if you told me you could have re-signed Rob Hunt for $20.5 million relative to what you could theoretically have secured if you were involved in the market last year, or what you could get this year, or what you could draft this year to replace Rob Hunt, the discrepancy between the talents with what's available. Now, you had to deal with the bridge here this year with guys that weren't good enough at guard, and it cost you dearly. But the drop-off from $21 or $20.5 million at guard with Rob Hunt or Trey Smith being 22, 23 versus getting 80% of the same player for 40% of the cost, that's where you get into the economics of building a team, and that's where the challenges, I think, exist. So, Trey Smith, spoiler alert, was the interior offensive lineman on the all-dog list that I did on Touchdown Miami. But I would prefer the team target other targets in free agency instead of getting into the kind of bidding war that you're going to need to secure Trey Smith's services as a player, while acknowledging Trey Smith also has some warts in pass protection as a player. But he's 26. He's got the physical component, and he's played for a championship team. You tell this guy has championship pedigree. You could tell coming out of Tennessee, he had some medical questions. There was some uncertainty of whether he's going to be able to play football again or not. And you could feel how he performs and embraces the opportunities that he has. And you could tell that just with the way that he plays, it was impressed on him, that doubt that he doesn't take his opportunities for granted now. It fits a lot of pieces of the puzzle for an attractive profile. But then you throw the economic cost into it as well, which brings you to the draft. And this is where I want to spotlight some names, because I think there's the opportunity for you through the first probably 2 rounds of the draft. Can you add another pick in the second round in any way, shape, or form? You might be able to convince me who's on the board at 13. You'd be better off moving into the 20s and picking up another late second round pick to get another bite at the apple. Now, it depends on who's there at 13, so please don't get mad at me if you are a draft Tyler Warren person no matter what. If Will Johnson's there at 13 at cornerback after the Dolphins made their transition at corner. I don't think predictively you're going to see Malachi Starks be valued by the league in that range. I think Jahdae Barron from Texas is a player who maybe you could move down and still target, but seems like a really popular, like Brian Branch type of player who's played inside. He played outside this past year. The ball production went up at corner. I think about in the second round, a couple of off-ball linebackers that I think are absolute dogs. Carson Schwessinger is a former walk-on linebacker at UCLA. Plays his rear end off, was a first-year starter, dynamic athlete. There's an athleticism component of him that really shines. And you could tell as a walk-on, he's had to earn it. He was not a silver spoon player who was a 5-star recruit and everybody kissed the ground that he walked on and is the best thing to happen to football since forever and carries himself that way. No, there's you could tell he's had to grind. He had to grind to get into the starting spot as recently as last year. And I think that shows with the way that he plays. Guy's a dog. That's the kind of guy you want. Draft him in the second round if he's there. Maybe you trade down, target him in the first round if you want to go that route, depending on what you do in free agency. Depending on what you do in free agency. Don't get mad at me for saying drafting a linebacker early. Depending on what you do in free agency. Tyler Warren at tight end. I think dude's an absolute dog. There's a physicality component with him. There's a versatility. You don't get to have as vast of a menu of responsibilities as you do, as Tyler Warren did at Penn State, without being buried into the football element of life. A couple of wide receivers in the draft that made the all free agency NFL draft all dogs team. Elik Ayumanor from Stanford and Jack Betch from TCU. These guys play every down like it's their last down, and it doesn't matter whether it's 3rd and 20 and we're running a deep post, or it doesn't matter if it's 2nd and 2 from the 2-yard line and we're digging out a safety in the run game. These guys play every rep like it's their last. You bring that kind of urgency with a physicality component. Both those receivers are more than 210 pounds. Dolphins don't have a single guy in wide receiver room that can do something like that. Certainly not with the receiving profile that those guys do. Grant Dubose has a physicality component, but he dealt with 2 injuries last year. It's a tough mix. Kenneth Grant at defensive tackle was number 3 on the Bruce Feldman's freaks list for the most freakiest athletes in all of football, for a guy that plays in the 340-pound range and is running down running backs 15 yards downfield, but can stack you up one-on-one inside and has the first step explosiveness to develop into a Dexter Lawrence type of talent. And I don't say that lightly on the interior. You got a lot of avenues in the draft to dogs. And they just happen to be players that are all of the things that the free agency guys that are available that check all the boxes are not. They're cheaper. There's no bidding. There's no bidding war for these guys. They're younger. More often than not, they're healthier. Draft capital is gold. This team needs more. And this team needs to make them count. And I get it. Like I said at the beginning of the show, this team gets zero benefit of the doubt for any element of it. So you're going to hear me say this team needs more draft picks, and you're going to leave in the comments. And I know it's going to happen. And somebody's going to comment it before they get to this part of the show. It's going to be super awkward. And I'm sorry that I'm talking to you. But you're going to leave the comment. You're going to say it doesn't matter how many draft picks the Dolphins have if Chris Grier's making the picks. Chop Robinson might be a dog. We'll see. He's got bite. He's got the physicality component as far as the explosiveness that he plays with. How does he mature over time, both physically and then as far as his leadership and his persona and his focus and the intensity of which he prepares himself? Can't wait to find out. You'd like to think that's, a guy come from Happy Valley. I went to Penn State. Ain't a lot to do in Penn State other than if you're going to parties or if you are prepping for football games. Chop seemed like a guy, especially based on the relationship he has with his dad, that prep for football games. And if he can do it there, he can do it here. I'm not guaranteeing that it's going to work out either. But I'm saying your fastest pathway to putting the kind of talent that this team needs together from a demeanor, intensity, explosiveness, physicality, all of the above perspective. This draft class has it, and there's enough depth in this draft class with players that I think qualify for that you should be able to get multiple bites of the apple. And you can maybe selectively pick your spots with a handful of free agents that might be in their late 20s, that maybe play some devalued positions, or maybe they're coming off of an injury and the team that is letting them go is in salary cap hell, so they can't afford to keep them. It's kind of a tease for the article over on Touchdown Miami as far as some free agency options that I think might make some sense. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Talk to you all again tomorrow. Go Fins.